This is Justin Gifford again with Gifford Homes. My wife Shannon and I help people achieve their real estate goals with a mindset of commitment beyond closing. We're bringing you another one of our go-to vendors. This is the Gifford Go-To video series where we interview people that we are go-to people that we refer buyers and sellers to in the event that they have issues or like need to make improvements, things like that. So this week, we're speaking with Ben Vleisides with Spartan RamJack. They are a foundation repair company, and they do a number of other things that Ben will get into with a little more detail. But I guess we'll get the ball rolling. How are you today?
Good. Just trying to stay warm out there today.
Right? Yeah, snow day for everybody, and yeah, it's awfully bright.
Right. Yeah. Ain't that the truth?
So my first question is usually a background question. So, how did you come to work for Spartan RamJack, and the foundation business?
So, the short version is my brother got me into it. So he actually is the owner of Spartan Foundation Repair, and he started it early 2000s. And I was in high school, fresh out of high school, needing a job, started digging holes. Did that for several years. Ended up being the crack repair guy for a while there, and then left. Had my own company for a couple years, but obviously kept in touch with my brother, right? But then I don't know. One time we were sitting down, and it was like, well, I know you're doing your own thing, but I really need some sales guys, and you had, what was it, 6 years of experience before I went and had my own thing. So knowing the work wasn't my problem. He was like, I can teach you how to sell. So came back for the sales, been here for a couple of years ever since.
So I know you, both of us. It's important to both of us that we have great communication with our clients, and so you and I have talked about that in the past, and had experience with you helping my clients and being great communication with them. But can you tell me about your process with making sure you're communicating well with your clients and how that works, what that looks like?
Yeah, so even on just from the scheduling standpoint, so right when the job gets scheduled, I mean, I have an email that goes out to them, kind of introduces me. Hey, do you have any previous paperwork we can talk about or need to see before we get there? It kind of gives me a little introduction, and then obviously I go there, I do the evaluation, we get in touch, but then I that's not usually on a lot of foundation companies, that's usually the last time you'll hear from the sales rep, right? But we don't like to say that we have sales rep, we have project managers, right? So I'm not just a sales guy. I'm actually coming out to the job, making sure it's going smooth, lining the guys out. I'll be there at the beginning, middle, of the end of the job, before the job. If there's ever any warranty situations, I'm the person to call, and I'm the guy that comes back out. I know the job, so I'm gonna see what was wrong with it, right? So that's kind of our stance on that.
Yeah, nice. So you're kind of working all the way through the project, which is
Yeah,
yeah, tends to be reassuring when they know, yeah, you make a phone call and then suddenly there's a stranger at your house and you don't hear from
right.
you anymore. So yeah. So what are some of the different services you provide? Some people may not. Well, what are some of the services you provide to begin with?
Yeah. So I'll start small, I guess, and go bigger. The smaller end, I mean, we do everything from uh, crack repairs to, let's waterproof to interior drains, sub pumps, wall wraps. Then we got the beams, anchors, pushing out of wall. We don't pour new foundations, but we fix broken foundations,
Okay.
right? So piers, obviously, poly jacking, some sidewalks, driveways. We help lift front porches, which people often overlook. Chimneys. We're not a mason, so if like you need somebody to tuck point your chimney, that wouldn't necessarily be us, but I have a guy that I
Okay,
can recommend. So
nice. And then going in, I know from experience, I've had clients who kind of know a little bit about foundation repair, but they start to use some of those terms you use interchangeably, like anchors and beams and things like that. Can you walk through just kind of uh, the short version of what each of those does and what they actually correct?
yes, so your anchors and beams are going to stop the inward push of a wall, but none of them actually stop the outward push. So I like to bring this up because a lot of people don't like to talk about the downsides to certain repairs. So I see it happen all the time. People will spend a bunch of money bracing a wall, but then they think, "Oh, I don't have to water anymore. It dries out and the wall falls back out." That's not true. There is always still a little bit of homework here. But anyways, so beams and anchors will stop the inward push. Uh, Piers would be up and down movement, right? You'd stop it from going down. Um, the big difference, though, between using an anchor and a beam, you can't use beams on a wall that has a walkout on the opposite end. Because if you think about how this works, you have your beam and your wall, the joists are attached to them that go to another wall, right? Well, if this wall isn't underground and you have your beams over here, you're just going to push it, right? So you have to have dirt on the other side for those beams to work. That would be a situation where, oh, we can't put beams here, we have to put anchors because we
Okay.
don't have a wall on the other side, right? But yeah, so that's some of the differences there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I got to admit that that makes total sense once you explained it. But yeah, I'd not heard that before. The walkout the opposite side. So that's okay. I've already learned something. So maybe we're done here. I've learned something.
Right.
um. So is there anything you guys do that other people, what general people might not expect, beyond just foundation repair?
Yeah, so some of that stuff is going to be French drains, buried downspouts, regrading. I mean, we have the Bobcat and the excavator, anyways, right? So it doesn't take us much to just go through and cut grade and do all that and put in some drains. Um, the one thing that we do differently than a lot of people on burying downspouts, we don't really like using the black drain tile, right? Because that black scrunchy pipe, yes, it is cheaper and easy to put in, but I'd rather charge you just a little bit more and put the drain in once than have to put it in every 2 years,
Okay.
right? So we use the thin wall PVC. That way, you're not getting anything crushed by a lawnmower driving over it or anything.
Okay. You're talking about that black corrugated tubing.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. So you see that almost. I
All the time.
Yeah.
Either the lawn guys, weed whackers, will tear through it, or the ground will be really wet and squishy, and their lawnmower will run over it, and it'll kind of compact.
Right.
And just so if we can avoid these things, I'd like to.
Right. Makes sense.
Right.
And so you're saying that's not a considerable price difference going to a solid tube?
No, no, not at all.
Okay. Nice. Um, Good to know. So I know we both kind of build our businesses through referral and find value in that. How is that important for you?
I mean, referrals are the best kind of leads for me, right? I mean, that's if I have somebody who says, "Hey, my friend needs some foundation repair," I already know that's more of a sure thing because it's through a friend of mine, right? And then it's less likely to just be, well, I just need you to look at something. I don't really need any work,
Right.
right? Those referrals pay off, but yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. What would you say is the best referral you've ever seen?
Best referral I've
Sorry,
ever.
best referral you've ever received. I don't know about
Okay,
seen.
okay. Let's see here. I mean, me personally, It was a guy who, hey man, this guy, he's flipping this house. The driveway doesn't look very good. I think he's going to need some work on his garage. Okay. I get out there and it's half the house is leaning this way. It's a flip house situation, a foreclosure. So we got it for a good deal. We ended up lifting half the house on there and re-leveling a bunch of floors. So we didn't have to tear out some wood floors and resurface them. So that was nice. But yeah.
Nice. Makes me think of a question that I sometimes have and don't always know the answer. So, how do you is will you handle a stone foundation, or do you guys only handle poured and or cinder block foundations?
Yes. So the big stipulation on stone foundation is you can't lift on them, right? So you also don't. There's so back to the piers. There's two different kinds of piers. There's a push pier where I use the weight of your house to push the pier down, or if I don't want to put pressure on your house, I want to spin it down into the ground like a giant screw. I'd use a helical, right? So on stone foundations, you're more likely to use like a helical because you don't really want to be putting a lot of pressure on those stones that are just stacked with mortar because then
Okay.
you start breaking stuff, right?
Right.
But yeah, so those all those old homes that are 100 years or plus more that are all stone, it's usually somebody's usually hoping we can lift them 5 inches because they're out of whack, and I got to
Right.
give bad news of, well, we can keep it where it's at, but you're probably going to have to redo the floor,
Right.
right? But
Yeah,
we work.
I have that question come up a lot, and you go into those old. You kind of have to warn somebody about what an old, 100-year-old house, what that foundation is going to look like, and the moisture content of the air generally down there tends to be
Right,
different than what you've expected. But knowing that going in, knowing that that's kind of part and parcel of that kind of age of a home, uh, allows them to be a little less nervous. But when you do see movement and everything, they, if it's a great house and they think this, I would love this, but I'm a little bit sketchy on this. You guys can come in and you can come in and say, okay, these are the kinds of things we can do to make this so it's not an issue any further.
right,
But you can't push the whole thing up and kind of reset it like you could other types of foundations.
right. You can't put lipstick on a pig.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Yep. um, So since I've asked for your best referral ever, can you tell me about a strange or crazy, odd referral that you've had and what the situation, what that outcome was,
Crazy odd referral.
or job? Doesn't necessarily a referral, but
Uh, one that I'll give you two.
okay.
Okay. One was a guy whose wall we ended up needing to push out because it was leaning in so hard. It was leaning in about 8 inches, which is pretty bad. It was buckling in the middle. If it was leaning straight from the top, his top half would have fell. But since he was buckling in the middle, the top part was still kind of touching the joist upstairs. But that one was interesting because when we went to go push the wall out and taking the cabinets down and all that, we realized the whole reason the wall is still up is because the shelf is wedged against the beam, which is wedged against the cabinets, which is wedged against the wall. Right. So we immediately were like, well, we're not going to take any of that stuff down yet. We're going to throw some beams up first and then move that stuff. So just in case, we've already got it braced and we can start pushing it out and everything. But that was a really interesting one there. The other one that comes to mind that we didn't even end up, that the house was in such bad shape I couldn't even get a bid out. So I showed up to the house, and I think me and you've talked about this before. But the first red flag was the lady was not meeting me there. Right? She's like, "Oh, it's a vacant house. You can walk right in. Yada yada yada." Okay. Well, I get there. I look in the door, and there's a shut off notice on the gas, which I'm like, well, it's a little weird on a vacant house. Usually it's, hey, there's no gas here, not, hey, we've shut the gas off. Right. So I go around back where she tells me to go in, and, doors all kicked in, and there's stuff stacked everywhere, ceilings falling down. There's a little pathway you can walk between the kitchen to get downstairs. But once you get to the bottom of the stairs, you're stuck because there's all this stuff packed everywhere with mounds of stuff. I mean, if you wanted to crawl over it, you could, but it was, yeah, that was the only time I've ever had to call somebody and be like, listen, I'd love to give you a bid, but I can't even map your house. Like, it is physically impossible for me to take measurements of your house right now.
Right.
So that was about the craziest one there that I saw.
Yeah, I've been to a number of homes where obviously that storage down in the basement is fairly common, but when there tends to be some of those people that just hold on to a few things more than they
Right.
should. And then you've talked to your buyers about what to look for, and the reason you should use me is I'm the one that's looking for the problems in this house, because you're going to get excited about the granite countertops and whatnot. And one of the main things I'll look at first, I should probably start telling people, let's just go to the basement first. That way we don't
Right.
you don't fall in love with it before we get down there.
Right.
But the number of times you go down and maybe one wall is accessible to see if there's any movement or structure, cracking or anything like that. And a lot of times, they're not even going to move it for inspections, that sort of thing. So it does become a real problem to try to have to deal with that, even at that stage, let alone needing very specific information like measurements and stuff that you do.
Right.
So I can't even imagine what that would look like.
Yeah, I mean, if it was like, well, I just need you to measure one room, that's, we can work around. But it literally, that was a situation where it was like, you can go one way in and one way out, and you can't go anywhere else. That was it. But
yeah. Do you ever have people? Obviously, there's finished basements and things like that, and then there's some concerns about. I've got water coming out underneath, but we've got sheetrock up and everything, or whatever. Most people allow you to go ahead and cut into that to investigate further, or is there an apprehension at that point?
Some, right? I mean, some people are like, sure, you cut whatever you need. Let's tear it out right now. I don't care. Some people are like, well, I've got my handyman guy. I'd rather him take the wall apart because he's going to be the one putting it back together, which is totally fine.
Yeah.
Right. That's totally fine, to each their own. But yeah, it's. I used to carry this camera with me so I could do a little hole and try to do that and save the drywall. But honestly, you just got to look at it. Right. And if this is something where it was like, well, we know there's a crack here and there's a leak here, and I want to do something about it, but I don't want to tear it. There's a bar in the way or something. Right. Yeah. I mean, there's ways we can do exterior waterproofing, do it from the outside, or whatever we got to do. There's a million and one ways to skin this cat.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just because you have a nice finished basement or a home theater downstairs doesn't mean that we have to tear all this up to keep water out of your basement. Yeah. Right. Now, I will say that usually an interior repair is cheaper than an exterior repair because you're not having to dig all the time. Right. But I always tell people, even if it is cheaper for me to do it one way, you still have to think of the job as the full scope, right? Not just, what am I doing? Is it cheaper for me to do it that way, or are we going to have to spend X amount of dollars to redo the basement afterwards too, right? I mean, it's got to make sense.
Yeah. So my thinking on something like that is there are certain people who would like to just put Band-Aids on problems, being it, bathroom repair or something like that. My hope is that the foundation, what are literally the feet and protection of your home from the ground up, aren't as likely to do that. But you tell me, is that the case or not? Are there people that are kind of just wanting Band-Aids for some of these things?
Yeah, some, right. I see two ends of the spectrum. I see on one end, you've got almost some people who are kind of in denial, right? Where it's, listen, man, I've had this crack for 15 years. It doesn't leak that bad. I just kind of suck it up every now and then, and that's all I do. And it's okay, that's fine. But, shoving a little concrete on there isn't really a waterproofing repair, right? I mean, as soon as that concrete moves, it's cracked, and then you're back to square one. It's on crack repairs, there's two ends to it, right? There is the crack itself, which you need to seal, and then you've got, well, why did the crack get there in the first place, right? And usually people focus on one end of that and not both. But the other end, I see a lot of companies come out and they'll say, well, you've got a crack here and a crack there. We need to put in this elaborate system and this and that, and this sub pump here and a drain there. And it's like, well, I mean, crack repair is I mean, it can be a couple $100 depending on how long the crack is.
Yeah.
Right. Just there's many ways to do this here, but if it also the downside to crack repair versus like an interior drain, crack repair, you might have to hit it a few times, right? Because if it's on the really tight cracks, if it's pinched here, we might have to come back and drill it in. If that's your concern and you're like, well, I've got this, pool table and really nice basement, I don't want to get any water in here or anything, I want a one and done kind of solution. Well, then maybe the interior drain is kind of the way to go, because you put it up the drain and then it's done. You hide it behind the walls and you don't see it ever again, right? But that's, again, there's many ways to do this.
Yeah. Well, speaking of many ways to do this, I just literally thought of this question.
Yeah.
I was a couple of years ago, I was at a house and there was some severe foundation damage, but it had been repaired. But I had our go-to structural engineer come out, and he flat out, like, he saw the moment he saw this type of repair, he was like, well, this isn't even the right product. This is not how this is supposed to be used. And it's a product I haven't seen that often. And so maybe if I can explain it well enough, you can tell me what it is. It almost looks like a fiberglass repair. It's like a strip or sheeting that they put over versus like the epoxy injection and things like that.
It's
and I don't see that often, but this guy was adamant that this was clearly not the right repair. So can you tell me kind of what that is and what that's the best solution for?
So from what you're saying here, it sounds like it was a woven material that then got covered by an epoxy, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that sounds like a carbon fiber mesh with some sort of structural epoxy. So that would be, depending on how, I had to look at it to see how they attached it, right, to see if it was done right. But I mean, if you're looking for a waterproofing repair, that is not the right thing. That is more a structural repair. But frankly, carbon fiber. So I'll give you a perfect example of when I'd use carbon fiber. So we can use, if you had a bunch of pipes that ran across your wall that I needed to put beams on or something, but I could slide a little something behind those pipes, I could do carbon fiber because it's thinner.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. So I could slide that in there, do the epoxy and cover that. But that's for a structural thing. If it's like, oh, I got a crack, let me just smear this stuff on there, that's not right, because you're not filling the crack.
Right. Okay.
Right. So that's really the key. If you're trying to keep water out, you have to fill the void or patch the void on the other side.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. So that's super helpful, because he was with such certainty walked in and barely looked at it. I was like, oh, okay, well, and it's a guy I trusted, an older guy that used to work for this Corps of Engineers or whatever. So he was my reliable go-to structural engineer. So I trusted him. He wasn't great at explaining why.
Well, probably that carbon fiber is not exactly cheaper than normal just a crack injection, right? So that means that somebody got charged probably twice or three times as much for, a couple $100 repair that could have just fixed that crack.
Okay.
Right. And then they didn't even, did they address the crack? Yes, but they didn't achieve the goal they were going for, which was keeping the water out.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So it's just a Band-Aid at that rate.
Right. Yeah. Almost literally.
Like, almost literally. Right. Exactly. A very expensive epoxy Band-Aid.
So I guess that leads into what most people are much more familiar with is the epoxy injections. So can you kind of walk through just quick lay terms what that, obviously those things are sticking out afterwards and people know, okay, that I've heard that's what that is. Can you explain how that works and why that's a worthwhile solution?
Yes. So first of all, there's two kinds of injections. There's a epoxy injection and the urethane injection. If you're looking for a structural advantage, which all that means is, what am I putting inside the crack? Am I putting polyurethane or am I putting epoxy? If you're looking for a structural advantage, you need to put epoxy. If you're looking for a waterproofing advantage, you need obviously polyurethane, right? So the crack repair is nice because, I mean, like I said, you can come in and 9 times out of 10, I'll see a crack off a corner of a window or in the corner or on a seam or something. And people will call me up, oh my God, I got this crack. It leaks this water. It looks so bad. You come out and it's like, whoa, all we got to do is inject this thing with a little bit of foam, and that's all we need. But to explain how that works, so you've got the epoxy on the outside of the crack, right? So that kind of seals it up, but then you have your plastic ports sticking through that, right? So those are going to act as your access point inside the crack.
Okay.
So surface hardens on the epoxy. So you got this gray, chunky peanut butter looking stuff with these plastic things poking out. They're about hollow tube, circular base, about this big, about the size of my finger, which I'm sure you've seen. So they get glued on the crack every foot or so. If you have a really tight crack, you really want to go a little tighter than that. If you go a really wide crack, I mean, theoretically, you could put one at the bottom, put one at the top, pump till it comes out the top, and you're done. Right? So, perfect world, when you're injecting this urethane here, it's flowing port to port to port to port all the way up. And that's super easy, like I said, on the really wide cracks. What we find, though, on those really tight ones, it doesn't always go port to port to port. But that's also why you have to set multiple ports tight together. Because if you have, here's your crack, we're pinched here and pinched here, well, we need a port right here between those two pinches, right? So you got to set them a lot on those small ones there.
Okay.
But that's also why we might have to come hit it another time. Not to say that it doesn't work, but you got to fill the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right? If you leave a small pin size hole, I mean, that's still a hole.
Yeah.
Right. So it's sometimes we've had situations where you got to come back and chase that hole, but that's why you do it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's worthwhile. I hadn't heard it makes sense that anytime that crack kind of comes together and creates a barrier, you need another entry point. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Good to know. So I'll be able to share that with people from now on, because I can explain how it works a little bit in lay terms or whatever, but like that's good to know, to be able to go with a little finer detail on that. So,
and to be clear on the ports, so once you have the foam in there, the majority of the hardening and curing happens within like the first hour, right? Okay. So it's really after you give it a day worth of cure time, those ports can be knocked off the wall.
Yeah.
Because it's not like I can just plug back up to the port and pump more foam if it needs it. It's hardened in there. It's hardened inside that tube there, or maybe almost all the way hard. But either way, all those ports can come off. Doesn't matter. Or you can leave them. Doesn't matter to me, but it's worth mentioning.
Yeah, I always speak to those a little bit like I do when the old poured foundation and they leave that metal thing in there, and that people don't swing that back and forth. I always wonder why after a certain point people will come through and knock those ports off, but I'm like, whatever, to each their own.
So it's on those tabs, usually the low guy on the totem pole, after they pour a foundation, will go through and tap those off, and they'll use them as like shims or something in the
Right.
beam pocket or something. But yeah, it's always fun. It's really funny when you can tell the low guy was really short because he's got all the tabs except for the very top one. Yeah, that's always the funny ones.
Yeah.
But, I'm like, somebody my height did that. So, but yeah.
When my parents rebuilt a house, they rebuilt a house on a foundation that the house burnt down and it was all cleared or whatever. But there were some of those left, and I got my arm caught on one of those. So it's front of mind when I see them now. I was like, I'm gonna get my pliers to take that off myself.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've lost a few hoodies that way. You nick your arm on it. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You're hauling out a bucket of concrete and you kind of scuff against it. Yeah. It's never fun.
Yeah.
Make sure you're up on your tetanus.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly, because I've never seen one not rusty. No matter how dry the
Right.
basement is, they're always rusted.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. They definitely aren't galvanized. I'll tell you that.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, is there anything that you can think of that you'd like people to kind of know about that we maybe didn't touch on here that you usually try to let people know to think about or plan for?
Yeah. So the one thing I'd like to touch on is the fact that we are a family owned company. We run 5 locations, right? But we're also franchised with RamJack. And so the reason I bring that up is the one of the biggest problems I see with a lot of foundation companies is they can promise you whatever they want, but if their company's gone in 2 years, that's a 2-year warranty, right? And as we've seen, these companies, they come and go and whatever. But with us being franchised with RamJack, we have a kind of secondary warranty, if you will, on all of our peers. So, say for whatever reason, my brother was like, I want to travel the world and sell the country or sell the company and whatever. He can
Yeah.
do that, and you still have warranty under RamJack, right? So we're never going to ever leave you uncovered on our warranties, right? Even if something, God forbid, happens to us.
Right. Okay.
That is a huge plus that I don't see. I think nobody else does, but I could be wrong. But I'm going to go out and say I don't think anybody else does that.
Yeah, no, that's definitely good peace of mind because the warranty is only typically the warranty is only as good as that you want to have a local business or whatever, but yeah, you do certain times run the risk of the going out of business and then your warranties. So yeah, that's super reassuring for people to know that they're going to be covered depending on how your brother moves forward or whatever. So that's good to know.
All right. Oh, one more thing. Speaking of warranties, we do not like the term lifetime, right? Because state to state, legally, lifetime is different, which when we have 5 locations can be a little hairy.
Right.
So we say this: life of structure. So as long as, if I've piered your house, right, as long as that wall that I've piered is still there, I'm going to cover those piers. Now, do I think that those piers will deteriorate? I mean, maybe in like 3,000 years from now, sure. But by that time, the house is not going to be here, right? So we like the term life of structure instead of lifetime or limited lifetime or whatever.
Right.
But I figured it's worth noting.
Absolutely, because that speaks to more to the specifics and the thing that people actually care about, which is I spent this money because I care about this structure.
Exactly.
So yeah, no, good point for sure.
Exactly.
Well, hey, I appreciate you meeting with me today and letting people know some of the finer points of what you guys do, because I know those are like I said, big questions for some people, and I can usually answer some general questions, but you being able to go into some greater detail and sort of clarifying some of those things, whether it be types of methods of repair or
Right.
hows and what's was super helpful. Like I said, I even learned 2 or 3 things today that I didn't know, and you and I have talked about quite a few foundation repair
Right.
matters. So
Right.
so it's been worthwhile for me as well, but I think people are going to find some real value in this video. So I really appreciate your time and what you do to help us. So I wanted to thank you and wish you a good rest of your day. I know it's still snowing, I think, but
Yeah.
Hopefully, you might have some more calls. I guess people will find out they've got some wet basements when some of
I
this
mean, if it's just money falling out of the sky, I'm hoping, right?
right. You just got to grab it.
You're right. Exactly.
All right. I appreciate it, Ben. We'll talk to you later. Thanks a lot.
Take it easy, man.